And I don't see any, I actually don't see any attendees logging in, but that's okay. So Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. Unless Janine, would you like to? Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. This is the first kickoff of our economic development plan. We hope to have an action-ready plan in the new year. And I can't think too metaphorically about entering 2020 with an economic development plan. We selected the fourth economy to usher us through this process with a committee that included representatives from the county, LCBA, university, LCCC, and Main Street. We had, I think, a pretty holistic selection process, and now we are casting an even wider and more diverse net in forming the steering committee so that we can make sure that we are looking at economic development from every possible angle. So to that end, I greatly appreciate your time and your commitment and your expertise. I'm excited and I'm really appreciative of your support.
I would like to suggest we all introduce ourselves. I think most folks know one another, but not entirely sure everybody does. So while we make introductions, I will pass along these folders that we prepared for committee members. If you'd like one, take one. If you don't, you're not obliged. And I will start introductions. I'm Janine Jordan. I'm the city manager. I'm chairing the steering committee with strong support from co-chairs Brad Enzi with the Chamber of Business Alliance and Heather Tupper with the Laramie Business Council. I understand Heather will be here today, so we should be seeing her joining us as we get going. I'll pass these along, and maybe Mr. Sinikowski, you can go next, and we'll go clockwise.
Well, pleasure to be here. My name is Ed Sinikowski, and I'm with the University of Wyoming. I serve as the Vice President for Research and Economic Development.
And I'm Jack Vedesum. I am the President and CEO of Trihydra Corporation. We're an engineering and environmental consulting firm based in Laramie.
Shannon Folk. I'm here as the appointed member from the City Planning Commission. I also work at the University of Wyoming.
I'm Derek Taney, City Planning Manager.
I'm Jessica Stalder. I'm the City Council rep from Ward 1.
I'm Chaz Abilal with AMB Bank. I chair the Downtown Development Authority and sit on the Laramie Main Street Board.
My name is Jack Skinner. I'm the airport manager representing the airport.
I'm Kendall Hutchinson. I'm representing the Wyoming Smart Capital Network as the development specialist.
I'm Rebecca Miller. I'm with AMB Bank, and I also serve on the LCBA board.
Jonathan Rhodes, City IT.
He's helping me fumble through a
We're
live stream.
Get it streaming on Facebook here.
We've heard from Sarah. Sarah Reese is the city's administrator for.
Did we get Warren?
We will, yeah.
Okay.
Sarah's our administrator for economic development and community initiatives in the city manager's office.
I'm Terry Jones, Albany County Commissioner.
I'm Warren Grisser. I'm a local land developer, and today I'm here as vice chair of LCBA. And Mike Peck will actually be attending most of these meetings. He's the chair of LCBA.
I'm Brad Enzi. I'm the CEO of the Laramie Chamber of Business Alliance and co-chair to however Janine needs to use me so that we can get a good comprehensive plan as a whole team and community-wide.
I'm Tim Stamp, semi-retired from coffee engineering, chairman of the airport board, and working on a new business called Laramie Reboot.
I'm Randall Six. I operate the UL Center of Excellence up on the hill.
And Jane Pierce, Laramie City Council, and I spend my days at UW, distance education.
We're missing a few members today, as Fourth Economy mentioned. Apparently scheduling anything productive in Wyoming during Frontier Days is a bad idea. So, as I said, Heather Tucker may be joining us. Also unable to join us from UW today is Jean Garrison, who is the director of the Office of Community Engagement. Did I get that? We also are missing our third council member representative today. That's Brian Schuster. He may be logging in by webinar. Just to articulate, the city council members, 3 will be participating in the steering committee. They are, as Jessica said, representing their wards as elected officials, but also chosen to be on the steering committee because of key liaison duties they have to other outside agencies in the community. So Councilor Pierce is the city council liaison to the Laramie Chamber Business Alliance. Councilor Stalder is the city council liaison to Main Street and Downtown Development Authority, as well as the airport, which are our other 2 key community partner agencies for economic development. And Councilor Schuster is the liaison to the City Planning Commission. The reason that we have Planning Commission representation, both from the elected official side as well as from community volunteer side in the form of Shannon Pope, is that this economic development plan will actually replace the city's current economic development plan, which is a chapter within our larger comprehensive plan for the city of Laramie. So with that being said, comprehensive plans and all elements thereof are run through our City Planning Commission for endorsement, as well as through the City Council. So we wanted to be sure to bridge those gaps. Few other members that are missing, we may have joining us remotely as well today. Senator Rothfuss noted he may join us remotely, and Representative Furphy said he may be joining us late due to another commitment. So
that's the team, right?
This is our team. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we are really excited about this.
Yeah, great. So I'm Rich Overmoyer. I'm CEO for Fourth Economy Consulting.
And I'm Nicole Muse-Kilcucky, and I'm with Fourth Economy Consulting. And you'll hear from me a lot. I've scheduled interviews with a few of you, but I'll be your main contact throughout the next 6 months.
Yeah, and we've been in town since yesterday morning, and have had a whirlwind tour, and today's jam-packed with meetings. So I think we've had the pleasure of meeting a few of you, and look forward to working with the rest of you as we kind of keep going through this process. One thing you'll find is we're very flexible and creative, as we like our planning processes to be fun. So we'll jam you into smaller rooms next time. No, just kidding. No, I think we'll find lots of opportunity to really sort of interact with one another as we go through this. Really, we want to get to know you, and you think, we really like to spend there's already tech is killing us here. We like to spend a lot of time on the ground, really getting to know the people and the community, because it's really important. At the end of the day, our philosophy is we're here to help facilitate, a plan development, but at the end, this is all going to be owned by you all. So that's what we're here to do. Worked a moment ago, right?
It did work a moment ago. See if the mouse works.
Welcome, Heather.
Sorry.
Hi, Heather.
That's okay. Introduce yourself for anyone that doesn't.
I'm Heather Tupper. I'm with the Wyoming Business Council.
It's working now?
I think the arrows work.
The arrows.
These slides.
Okay, great.
Thank you. All right, so I think, that's my intro. I think we've set the stage. And then we're going to kind of go through some really a presentation that kind of just talks to you a little bit about where we are. And then hopefully feel free to interrupt us at any point. Since this is our kickoff meeting, we want to make sure you're clear in terms of what we're up to, where we're going, sort of what our initial impressions are. And certainly we want to spend a good amount of time getting your feedback. As I've been telling those we've been meeting on the ground, is we're at that stage of we're creating this very large funnel right now of ideas and issues, opportunities, aspirations, passions, all that stuff sort of at the top of the funnel, that we're going to then start sort of, over the next month, basically start using that information and data and some other things that we're doing to start falling down into where are those areas of focus that we need to have, and who are the teams that we need to build in the community that are going to help us support development of ideas around us. And so we're at that top line. So today, hopefully you're going to throw some more things into our funnel that we can kind of start working with. So Nicole, turn over to you.
One thing that I wanted to mention about our planning process, we've gathered all of you here today, and we're really grateful that you're going to be serving as the steering committee for this process. Throughout our process over the next 6 months, community engagement is going to be a big part of what we do. We want this to be a plan that has the input and feedback from the residents of Laramie, stakeholders that may be experts in certain areas like tech and entrepreneurship or arts and culture. So we have you as the steering committee, and our intention is really to use you as a resource to help us identify who are those other experts in the community that we might talk with and convene in smaller groups. You know, how can we push out the fact that this planning process is happening to the general public through our social media channels. We'll have a big communications and outreach strategy that we can share with you as well. And as active as many of you are on social media, you know, your help getting it in front of the people that need to provide that input is going to help us as well.
And then I think Janine touched on it in terms of our schedule. I mean, we're on this pretty tight time frame. We kind of just show this as just a general framework. On the left is obviously sort of the process that it's been kind of tested and tried through our multiple years in business. And on the right is sort of how that flows in terms of the calendar that we're working on here. You know, there's some code things like build sessions are really that kind of, you know, build sessions really when we engage subject matter experts in the community to help us build the recommendations. And so that's a very fun, engaging activity that we'll give you more information as we kind of get into that. But you see sort of how that information is going to flow, and sort of as we think about engaging with you as a sounding board, you know, those are the kinds of intervals that we're going to have in terms of sharing information with you and getting your reaction to it.
Wiggle the mouse first and see if that
Wiggle the mouse and then click.
Something's working. This is working.
Okay. So we have a short visioning exercise that we wanted to go through with all of you. I know it sounds a little bit cheesy at first, but this is the type of engagement that we're going to do throughout this process. So at our build sessions that Rich mentioned, you know, our way of getting a lot of feedback very quickly is to have people in the room brainstorm, provide their input. We then take that information, we kind of collate it, and we start to identify patterns. So, you know, we might see that many of you are interested in Laramie in 5 years becoming X or Y or Z. And so we'll continue to kind of field test those things throughout the process. Sorry, let me grab no, that's okay.
In a rush to set up, we forgot to give you Post-it notes, so we're going to give you those real quick.
Yeah, and feel free to start brainstorming. And we have some markers and some Post-it notes. If you all would like to, thank you. Pass these down here.
Nicole, our council went through this exercise last night. Right. Council members in the room, can they repeat or
to start over? Double dip.
And folks, just a mea culpa on the room. We chose to meet in this room because many of you have a meeting downstairs at the end of this meeting. We'll find a little more accommodating space for meeting number 2, but we were trying to make it convenient.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about these in 5 years, Laramie will, right? So this is, you know, the focus here is an economic development plan that we do view, and as you see, as we talked through today, I mean, we take a very broad view of that. So economic development is, we think, influenced by things like housing availability. It's influenced by the education system. It's influenced by the amenities and the quality of place that you have in the community, and certainly influenced by the type of industry that you have here now and those that you want to have in the future. And so all that's fair game as you think about in 5 years an aspiration, and then in 20 years an aspiration. And if you can write 5 on the one that you're putting 5 and 20 on the one that you're thinking 20 years, that's going to help you collate those.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that we have a piece of paper.
I'm going to do it right on the door.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Whatever surface that good fun.
Yeah.
Okay. To make it work.
Yeah.
So 1 more minute. Wasting my time. That's great. Oh, time's up. So my time, I think my phone's still on silence. That was a minute.
Yeah, thank you. We're experts at reading handwriting.
Yeah. Only imagine.
Do you have doctor's handwriting, Shannon?
I don't know if it's bad for you.
I don't feel so bad.
Thank you.
All right.
Stick them up there whenever you need to. Okay, that works. Okay, so we had a conversation with Sarah and Janine and some other folks that were involved in the kind of genesis of this project about what we mean when we say a strategic plan. For what region are we talking about? And so these are a few definitions that were thrown out as options, right? So we have the city of Laramie, which is, a population hub. It's an economic center in many ways. We have Albany County that Laramie sits inside of. We have Albany County plus Laramie County, so including kind of two larger urban areas, Cheyenne and the city of Laramie. We also talked about keeping those two counties and adding Larimer County, Colorado, that includes the Fort Collins area. We know that the EDA and the Wyoming Association of Municipalities has their definition, so looking at Albany and Laramie counties plus Goshen and Platte, which are a little bit more rural to the north. And then there are other definitions that various groups like us, consultants that have come in trying to kind of understand what framework we're looking at have defined. The retail study by the retail coach looked at Albany County, Laramie County, Carbon County, Larimer County. So really, there's a lot of different ways to think about this. Do any of these definitions kind of resonate with anybody, or are there any that you say, no, that's not right, that can't be what we're talking about?
I think the further east you push, the more off of what we do. We get a lot of overlap stuff from Saratoga going out to Centennial. We're part of their economic center. We get a lot of medical traffic comes up from northern Colorado, Walden, that area. But I don't think we pull in from the east nearly as much as we pull in from Carbon County and northern Colorado, not even like Larimer County. Well, I don't know. Does anybody know what county Walden's in?
Looking it up right now.
Jackson.
Jackson.
Yeah, that whole area comes up, but going east, I don't think, my Walmart parking lot experience, Saturday and Sunday morning, a lot of Carbon County cars, a lot of northern Colorado cars, not as many County 2 and beyond cars. So.
Yeah. I think you're right, Fred, on that. We do get a lot of traffic from, and it's Jackson and probably Routt County, Colorado.
So the way that there's a lot of different ways to think about this. And the way that we might do this, and we do it often, is by looking at commuter data. This is only going to tell us part of the story here, but we did just want to show you what we found. So by looking at who is living and working in a region, and also who's coming in and from where, or who's leaving for work, that can kind of give us a sense of how self-contained an area is. And of the almost 14,000 people that work in the city of Laramie, most also live in Laramie. We know that the average commute time is 12 minutes. Less than 1% of workers have commutes of 90 minutes or more. Albany County, Wyoming, so that's this first column here. When we expanded out to Albany County, you know, they look roughly the same. So in other words, the city of Laramie houses most of the workers in the county, and so those numbers are proxies for one another. But in general, you see people moving from Laramie to Cheyenne and vice versa. So there is some connectivity in terms of people that live in Laramie going to Cheyenne for work and vice versa. The question that we had is the same true of the Fort Collins area? You know, given housing prices, is this a bedroom community for some areas of Colorado? And really, when we look at that, we see that that's not necessarily the case. We have very few people driving from Laramie to Fort Collins for work, and we have very few people driving from Fort Collins to Laramie for work. So we swap about 100 people, and statistically it's not that significant in terms of the percentage of workers that are coming from those areas. So if you look at this in a different way, you know, one thing that we see is that the cities really serve as employment hubs. People don't tend to leave their immediate area to find work, which, you know, you could see that as a good thing. You know, there's plenty of opportunities locally. Most live and work in the same city. Some leave the city for work, but far more are coming into the city. So the green in the middle is people that live in the city and are also employed in the city. The light green to the right is people that live in the area but then are leaving for work. And then the dark green on the left is people that are employed in the city of Laramie but live outside. And so all three markets look roughly the same. Fort Collins has a little bit more people that are commuting in and out.
Do you know, is that number from the south of Fort Collins, or is it?
We have to dig into that a little bit more. We do know, just based on the previous information, that they're not coming from Wyoming.
Yeah.
They're likely coming from areas around the Fort Collins area. And that's the city of Fort Collins. So it could be from county, it could be outside of that county.
Yeah, and the one thing we want to do today is also, as we're presenting, is we're kind of ground truthing data as well, because there is data and then there's the lived experience that you all have. And so one thing we've heard is there are a lot more people now. So this data, the most recent of this commuter data, is from 2013. We've heard that Cheyenne and Fort Collins, there's a lot more people possibly working and living in Cheyenne and commuting into Fort Collins. So those are things that, like, you guys can help us say, like, ground truth, like, yeah, maybe, I think that may have changed, you know, since that data was last collected. So as you see things like that, feel free to shout out.
Well, I can tell you that it has. Randy Bruns and Derek with their economic development group say there's almost 7,000 people now traveling back and forth.
Right, so and that would be, if that's true, right? I mean, and we see that, right? Because what happens is, like, that data then, you know, because when they collected that, that's only, what, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you've seen a boom in sort of that kind of activity happening. So that's a good point.
Okay, so generally, you know, just putting it all together, people aren't traveling that much for work, although that's starting to change. You know, there's a number of commuters going back and forth between the two cities in Wyoming, and probably more commuting will start to happen to and from Fort Collins. And just that, you know, the rural outlying areas don't change that much. So, you know, when we think about a region, you know, this is kind of what we're thinking about, but there are other things as well. So what are some of the political barriers or challenges that might make this region either feasible or unfeasible? What are some of the cultural challenges? We're crossing state lines. What are some of the funding challenges? So, you know, if you have any thoughts on that, those are the types of things that we'd like to consider as well. Okay, so we start all of our projects trying to understand what's happening on the ground from a high level looking in. So we looked at a lot of data. We reviewed a lot of the prior planning efforts that have happened in the Laramie region over the last 5 or 10 years. And then we've started to interview some folks. And so when we present our findings now, we're going to present them in this framework that we like to use. Everything kind of falls into one of 5 categories for thinking about economic development. So people and talent, place, business and investment, diversity, and resiliency. And this is largely based on an index that Fourth Economy has developed. It's called the Fourth Economy Community Index. It's an interactive tool. Anybody can go on and use it, and it's a really nice way to benchmark your community to see where you kind of stack up, see where you might need some room for improvement. And so we're making improvements to that tool as well. So these are all of the things that we read through. If there are other resources that you think are relevant for us to know, other sources of information, other reports that you or your organizations may have published, please let us know, let Sarah and Janine know, and feel free to pass those on to us.
And I would say, even if they're not reports, I mean, 2 things. One is we know from at least a couple people in this room that there's even active planning going on. We met at the university today, and there's some things that they're working on that could have an intersection. We met with the school superintendent yesterday, same thing. I mean, they're doing some things thinking about their relationship to the business community that could have an intersection. So even if there are things happening right now, we'd love to sort of collaborate with you to think about, you know, where is there synergy, especially if you're like outreaching to the public. We want to make sure we're not confusing, you know, residents about sort of why are we being asked all these different questions from different groups. So we'd love to work with you on that. But also, even if there's just things that were quick hit analysis, we've met a couple of people that are like, hey, we looked into this issue and we did a quick, you know, focus group. Would you like to see those notes? Throw it all at us. I mean, we'd love to see sort of like what's happening within the community. We'd rather build on things than go back and duplicate the effort that you guys have done. So this is the initial list we found. Anything else, you know, throw our way.
The third piece of our baseline understanding is to hear directly from community leaders, because the data and the documents only tell us so much of the story. So getting that firsthand perspective is really important. Our goal through this process is to interview each and every one of you as members of the steering committee, as well as 10 to 15 additional people that we'd like your help identifying. Since early July, you know, we've only been at this for 2 or 3 weeks now. We've managed to talk with 5 of our steering committee members, State Representative Dan Furphy, Anya Bendel from Cheyenne Leads, who does a lot of work with the Wyoming Economic Development Association, Rebecca Miller and I spoke a week or 2 ago about her work at the bank, but also within the LCBA, State Senator Chris Rothfuss, and Jack, who you know, is very active in the community, successful entrepreneur, and has a lot of perspective from that point of view. So people and talent. So we're gonna kind of dive into this, and Rich, feel free to highlight the things that you want to highlight given the amount of time that we had. We were very ambitious in our first pass of data, and so we have a lot of it. So we need to pare it down into the most critical pieces. So, I mean, the first thing that you see when you look at the people that are here, we have a lot of people that are college aged. That's no surprise, right, given the university. You also have a lot of folks that are in that 25 to 44, you know, beginning and mid-career stage, which is great. That's what a lot of communities hope for. But, you know, how is this skewed by the university population? When we remove the full-time university students, some of these are distance learner, but we think that there's about 7,000 full-time enrolled in the university under the age of 24. All of a sudden, those numbers look a lot more similar to state and national averages. So the one thing I think to point out is you do still have a big segment of people in this 25 to 44-year-old age, which is, you know, really what a lot of communities all around the country really hope for and aspire to. We know that people in Laramie have a high level of educational attainment, so higher than the US, higher than the state as a whole, similar to Fort Collins. So that's a huge asset that we can use and hopefully take advantage of. And then we know that people from largely Wyoming, but also a few other states, those are the leading states, are coming into the community for the educational opportunity. So thinking about how we might capture those people and their contributions to the economy. We also know that people, once they graduate, they go elsewhere. The bright spot is the dark blue is where people live that have graduated from the University of Wyoming. So there are some, it appears, here locally, but they're also going to Denver and other areas in Colorado. And then this is kind of the same information, but in a different format from a different source. So, you know, I think from a university perspective, we want to educate Wyomingites and keep them here, you know, hopefully in Laramie, but also throughout the state.
Yes, one thing is you can see through this data, I mean, we are trying to look at, I mean, obviously the university is such a big part of this community, both as an asset, as an opportunity as well. Good conversations about that today. So we're trying to look at, you know, and one of the things that even this trip, I think we are going to look at other communities around the country that are so dominated from a population standpoint with the university. And so we're, you know, there's another way of thinking about sort of like, how are they thinking about that town-gown relationship? You know, what do their numbers look like as we get into some more of this around housing and poverty? Like, we're seeing some things that we're not sure, like, what's the role of the university, good or bad, in those things. So it's something as we get into this, you'll see sort of more analysis around that piece. I mean, we do think there's a lot more opportunity than issue associated, but it's something we're trying to be mindful of as we get into the data.
Right. So some key takeaways about people and talent, you know, obviously the population trends, keeping an eye on those, and then also keeping an eye on wages, income, and career advancement. So I think, Jane, maybe it was you that made the point yesterday. We don't want all University of Wyoming graduates to stay here because they are from other places in the state, and those places probably want them back to a certain extent. But for those that do want to stay here, that want to find jobs here, do they have the resources? Do they have the opportunities that's going to allow them to settle down, start families, and live comfortably? You know, we think the educational attainment and the presence of the university is a huge opportunity. The real question is how we kind of bridge the gap between the talent that's here with the educational assets that we have to kind of plug everybody into what's happening from a town gown perspective. So one thing that we saw through our research as kind of a noteworthy strategy, the Next Generation Partnership, working with business, industry, workforce, community economic development to really narrow in on what industry needs and try to match education to that, and also using entrepreneurship as a talent attraction and retention kind of pipeline to bring people in.
So maybe we should pause for a second in case,
yes.
As you can tell, Nicole and I both love to talk fast. So I want to maybe pause to make sure in case you had questions or feedback that you wanted to throw our way around the people and talent category. Is there anything, or even ideas, you know, questions that you have, areas for exploration as we, you know, this is our first pass of data. We've been sort of generating additional areas for exploration that we're going to take back with our team. So anything else you want to know about, or anything seem off as you've seen that we've talked about?
Do you have a set of communities that you want to look at to compare?
We don't yet. You know, I mean, I think we were kind of waiting to see. One is, yeah, do you benchmark now, right? Because a lot of communities have their preordained list. I think you mentioned yesterday that the university also has university community, at least universities that it says are their peers, and we should look at those communities. It's probably a couple ways of looking at it. I mean, if you have some, let us know. Okay.
I'd encourage you to look at Cedar Falls, Iowa, University of Northern Iowa, and what they've done with their city to be a partnership. Totally changed in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So that I would.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
And then the initial way that we'll do this is we have a quick way of doing data. So we'll look at communities within sort of your weight class, right? So probably 25 to 75,000 maybe or something along those lines, and then look at the percentage of how much the university student makes up for that. So you make it a little bit bigger, maybe some smaller. So we'll take a look and just quickly scan the country, and then we'll look at cultural fit a little bit in terms of a lot of times, like if you look at a small community in New England may not be the same, but we'll look at that to see, and try to see sort of what those look like. So that'll be our approach then. And so we'll come back to the steering committee to probably just a quick pulse to say like, hey, these are the 5 we think we want to look at. What do they resonate or not, and so we'll do that exercise coming up.
Is there any weighting put in on this part where we're talking about people and talent to Biotech and LCCC? Okay, because those are 2 that I think fit in terms of us creating a workforce that they can adapt inside of the university context. We can go 4-year, 2-year, certificate program, beyond 4 years too. So I just think that's an important part. It's unique about Laramie for sure.
Yeah, you have that full spectrum here, which, definitely an asset. And I think that's when we think about some of the industries and then also some of the issue around poverty. I think thinking about that team as being part of the group, that we got to tackle some of those issues there and think about what that relationship is. Yeah.
So the next section is place, quality of place. A big component of that is housing. So when we look at median home values, we see that housing in Albany County is much higher than it is in Laramie County, where Cheyenne lives. Cheyenne, Laramie County is much similar to the state as a whole. Albany County, on the other hand, is starting to look more like Colorado. And so, that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. When you combine median home values with income, that's where an even stronger picture starts to emerge. So it's not just that the houses are unaffordable, but median household income is also lower than what's needed to support those home values. So the home value to income ratio, the higher it is, the less affordable that housing is. That's one way to think about it. Fort Collins, again, Laramie, the city of Laramie looks a lot more like Fort Collins with that ratio. Cheyenne's ratio looks more similar to Platte County or Goshen County. So those more rural areas where housing may be a little bit more affordable, even though median household income is lower in those places. So they're matching each other rather than having a mismatch.
Is there a way to tell what impacts the large student population has on this? I mean, how many of those kids factor into the median household income?
So thank you for asking that question. I know, that's great. You're following along. So
if it's by the time, we won't have to answer that question, so keep asking.
That we assumed that would be the case. Okay, all the college students are kind of dragging down that income, but that's really not the case. So when you look at the data across age groups, median household income in Laramie is lower at all age groups than your peers in Cheyenne, Platte, and Goshen counties, then in Wyoming as a whole, then nationally as well. So there's definitely something here.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note is there is another group, so Community Builders, who's actually a group that we've worked with in the past, is working with the city and the state on doing some housing analysis. And so we'll be getting into sort of that dynamic a good bit more, and also looking at sort of some piloting as that goes along. I don't know if there's anything else you want to touch on with that process, but.
No, but we know from all of our major employers and from our own human resources department that our housing is a tremendous impediment to attracting and retaining workers in our community. So we are working with a regional think tank headquartered in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, to try to wrap our heads around this, but then also to take some preliminary steps toward helping to, I think, stimulate more housing development in the community. But we also recognize that a silver bullet does not exist. We are using more of a shotgun approach, and the pellets are going to land in different areas, but we need a lot more work in this regard. We are taking maybe not quite a baby step, but also not a leap toward solving that problem.
And the city's work with community builders is occurring now, and in terms of timing, will overlap with what Fourth Economy is doing, so that late fall to early winter, we'll be dovetailing the community builders work with Fourth Economy, and trying to really dive down into where Nicole is. How do we, what is the shotgun approach that will yield the most bang for buck in terms of economic development, recruitment, retention?
Yeah, and I think as we go through this, it would be interesting to talk to, developers and real estate folks to better understand. I think it's the simple way coming in of our first visit is, there's a lack of available product, which drives pricing, and it seems to be an arbitrary pricing model based on, what landlords can get for rents from students, right? Which then creates sort of a value expectation of properties, which is, because of the concentration, it's pretty unnatural. It's creating this big marketplace that it shouldn't look like Fort Collins here, right, in terms of the pricing. And so, so we'll get more into that and sort of be, that'll be part of the conversation. But I think that if there is experience of people that have thought about this in the community and solutions, like both teams, we want to figure out who those folks are and talk about them.
So key takeaways from this section: housing, really linked to economic development, keeping people here, allowing them to afford as they start and grow families, infrastructure challenges, some opportunities that we see, the focus on downtown that the Main Street Alliance has done over the past few years, really making that a vibrant and exciting place, looking at alternative mobility strategies that appeal to and make the community a nice place to live. We already mentioned community builders, but again, like the 3rd Street planning that happened a few years ago, thinking about how do we increase pedestrian access so that the downtown and the corridors are more accessible to community members, and how do we make it safer for both drivers and cyclists, and how do we kind of improve through beautification, public art, and that sort of thing. So a lot of things to kind of build upon.
I have a comment.
Of course, yeah.
About place, and you mentioned keeping people here. We hear that a lot, and I'm wondering if there's another way of looking at it, or what you think in your experience, or what anyone in the room thinks about the distinction between making Laramie in Wyoming is such a place that people don't want to leave, as opposed to encouraging people to leave. I actually think the experiences outside of one's hometown can be really valuable in making the region a place that people want to come back to or are attracted to in the first place if they're born elsewhere. So I'm wondering if there's a larger or different kind of ambition that we can really strive towards.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So it's not just keeping people here, it's really making the region attractive. And one thing that we've heard anecdotally so far is people that want to live here, really want to live here. There's amenities and the quality of life and the recreational pursuits and the lively downtown. That's what draws people here, especially if they're from Colorado or have left the region and are thinking about coming back. So yes, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, we've worked with some regions that even are targeting from a persona standpoint of like, there's a cultural fit, right? That like you like the outdoors, you've probably grown up in the West somewhere, I think you like being near mountains and things like that. I think, and so like, as we think about even strategies for like, how do you think about recruitment or even types of industry ownership, thinking about those individuals that fit that. Like, it's gonna be a lot more difficult to think about somebody on a coast and saying like, that's never been here, to say like, this is the perfect place for you. But I think being very strategic, and so from a bang for a buck, it's a good investment to be very focused on that profile of that person that you're trying to, or company that you're trying to recruit.
Two of the things that, one thing that we hear and one thing that we're doing at LCBA, we're hearing from a lot of our employers that there's two things, because Jack we had a conversation about this, that Jack's company's been able to recruit back to Laramie using some of the other offices they've had, which I think is a unique thing that we should probably drill down with Jack more. Another one that we hear is like, people don't necessarily, our big employers here, hiring somebody out of college is a 7-year investment.
Yeah.
Because you get somebody that doesn't know anything and you have to take them like through your whole steps in your corporation. And that also is contingent on somebody leaving your corporation so that they can move up, as opposed to being able to recruit somebody with expertise that they've developed outside of the area and bring them back. And one of the ways that we're trying to work to solve that or create a workforce pool is people want to get back to Wyoming, it seems like, from our conversations. They want to get back before they buy that really expensive house where they move, and before they have kids, and before, so to try to catch them after they get that good first initial work experience and before they make those big life changes. So to the extent, we hear that a lot with our, both with our people, and I think Jack's had some of the best success in recruitment from, how he's functioned as a company and had luck with that, but it's certainly something that we're hearing all over the place with our larger employers.
That's great. It's helpful.
I think you need both. You need those qualified workers that are coming out of college or out of their first job, but you also need some gray hairs to mentor and manage those individuals. And I think that's one thing we've lost track of, is how do we get some of those older, really more experienced people in to manage companies to get them for growth. So I think you've got to identify both of those sectors as needs.
So moving on to the next section, this is looking at industry and the businesses and employers within those industries. So when you look at top industries sorted by employment, educational services is, leaps and bounds, the #1 employer in the region, followed by healthcare and social assistance. We have a lot of retail trade, accommodation, and food service, also linked to tourism, and then construction rounds out the top 5. When we rearrange that list by median earnings, we see those top 5 industries start to fall down the list a little bit. Meaning there are a lot of people that are employed in lower paying industries and occupations. The higher paying industries, public administration, professional, scientific, and technical services, utilities, there are fewer people working in those, but especially with professional, scientific, and technical, with the presence of the university and some of the other developments, we could expect to see more of that coming online. And then when you look at employment trends, it looks pretty flat. That blue line up top is education. So that's kind of the big outlier that tends to skew some of the data. If we remove that, we start to see some growth in certain areas. So arts, entertainment, and recreation, manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, real estate, finance, accommodation, and food. And so, again, just thinking about what our aspirations might be and what those targets might be, seeing what's growing, kind of where they fall on that median income scale, what are the types of business development that we want to focus on, and where might there be the most opportunity for growth.
Nicole, I just have to throw out the manufacturing growth, I feel, is very sort of edifying to the efforts of the Business Council LCB in the city in the last decade. And I can't say that we've driven all of that, but a lot of the businesses we've recruited and grant funded are in that arena. So I hope that blip is partly attributable to effort, not happenstance.
Yeah,
well, we hope so, because we need more of that. So if you figured some things out, let's just do more.
As part of this, will you help us to find down what kind of manufacturing? Because I think when we talk about manufacturing here, people get this idea that, we're going to bring in some huge plant. It's going to be, and the way that I combat it when I'm talking to people is I say, think about shipping things out in a FedEx envelope that are worth thousands of dollars versus shipping things out by train load. And that's how, to try to delineate, I think, certainly what I hear, and, to the extent you can help us drill this down, is our community would like to see more of those high value, high dollar, highly technical manufacturing opportunities as opposed to like a factory.
Yeah, it will, in each one of those areas, we'll be able to dig, we will be digging down in terms of what are the subsectors. And partly that'll be partly conversation, but also partly on the data side, we'll be looking at, you mentioned before, what's the educational capacity to ramp into some areas if they don't exist already, or maybe there is already capacity, either in the university or the community college or biotech. And then the other thing is to think about, also looking at what are the occupational levels that are here now, because I think, right, if you had a 100-person specialized manufacturer in X widget, they're gonna wanna know what's the workforce like right now, like how much of that am I gonna recruit? And you need to think about how much are they gonna be stealing from your existing companies, because both are opportunities and issues that you've got to deal with. And so we'll get down to that level with you to try to map out, like, these are the subsectors that really make sense for the community for the next 5-ish years.
Will you be able to help us drill down with, I know the answer based on the interview questions, this is more just for, like, how big of companies can we support from a move-in?
Yeah.
Right, that's part of the data analysis that Fourth Economy does that really helps us because, where I sit, people are like, let's go recruit the 150-person job. And it's not realistic for us right now. With 20 houses on the MLS, that's not realistic for us.
Yeah.
So they help us work all the way through that thought process as well.
And even if there's aspirational, right? So if you think there's a couple up here that are sort of thinking, especially on the 20-year side, like, there are things you can start doing now that you can get to that point, right? So like maybe there is some capacity things you can start building. So 20 years from now, you can recruit the 150-person firm. So yeah, it's part of that.
So you think about having a community with a matrix of industries or businesses, but they're not static, right? One thing we can certainly be sure of, it's happening now, it's driven by negative going forces such as what's happening with the coal industry in the state. There are also very creative and powerful and hard to predict forces in the world of, say, artificial intelligence that are going to disrupt the workplace and also disrupt how educational institutions need to respond to people who are being displaced 3, 4, 5 times in their career. And so I'd just like to maybe put out as a positive possibility that with the university, starting here afresh, creating a new vision with LCCC, recognizing that there are forces that are clearly going to disrupt the workplace. This region became known as one where town, university, community college develop a flexible, responsive way of working to adapt to whatever forces are brought to bear from external sources. I think it could really put itself ahead of the curve as being a place where communities know that, wage earners in the family have a pretty good set of resources to respond to whatever may come down the pike. So I think viewing this as a triumvirate that is going to develop an outlook that maybe isn't specific to a certain class of industries, but its main resource is that it's flexible, has high intellectual capital, and can respond to forces that are perhaps not obvious at this time.
And I think another thing that is worth mentioning just from conversations I've had in the last week, and Ed probably realizes the pressures, anybody that's at the university, that we have because we're the only statewide institution and the demands on our outreach. And I mean, like politically, Dan, right? Politically, that there's a big call at the legislature that the university really reach out to the whole state. There's been, that's a tone I've heard out of the legislature, and I think something we're gonna have to address.
Yeah, exactly. Part of that is the Endow Initiative is saying we need to have a higher educated workforce in our community to attract the kind of companies that we're after. So we do need more degrees in our state. And so university can take care of a lot of that, and the community colleges now can assist with that. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and I think that's both the present, to your point, the adaptation side of it too, right? That, I mean, we all know that these trends are happening and we're seeing it. We've been in communities where they're already being the manufacturing, because they're old line widget manufacturers, they're being decimated because being crushed by the, you know, folks that adopted technology. So like, how do we think about that balance going forward and making sure that it's not just education for education's sake, but it's sort of that whole system that's in place, make sure that they can keep getting upskilled when they need to, right? Yeah, good.
So just in summary, key takeaways from this section, you know, again, when we look at those leading industries, we see a heavy representation from non-traded. And so one of the ways to grow from an economic standpoint is to produce something and then sell it outside of the region to generate new money and new wealth inside of the region. So we had a conversation last night with council about growth and how much growth is appropriate and feasible and that sort of thing. But if you know, measured growth is a goal, I think a focus on traded industries has got to be part of that equation. Regulatory environment for business attraction and expansion. Some of the opportunities that we've seen is just a focus on small business and retail development. Some of the exciting things happening around tech and innovation from an entrepreneurship standpoint, and resources that exist to support existing businesses. So Ed and Neil just shared with us this morning about how the university is starting to look at all of the different programs that support businesses and startups and entrepreneurs at the university level. And I think having a really like fluid and complete system for supporting businesses from their infancy to growth is really, really key, and we're starting to see that here. Again, noteworthy strategies, just looking at what the Wyoming Smart Capital Network has been able to do with funding from the U.S. Treasury to support small business expansion. That's really exciting. And then we had a conversation around the BRE committee on the LCBA, you know, packaging resources for businesses so that they know where to turn when they need marketing or site expansion or HR issues. Next section is on our diversity. So, Rich, I don't know if you want to do the quick rundown of this.
Yeah, I mean, the Gini Index is just a way of looking at, I mean, some communities struggle because they have extreme wealth and extreme poverty. And so, you know, basically you want to have it, you're good, right? Basically what this data is showing is compared to other places. And I think we've even heard it, how this bears itself out in the communities. We've heard that people are very giving of their time and their volunteering of efforts. We need to raise funds for certain things they're giving. I mean, in other communities, because you see such a, if they have a worse off Gini index, you don't see that kind of community spirit in place. So yes, that's a good stat as we look at these things.
I think this is the real issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things that we've been digging into is the poverty rate. So it's 23% poverty rate here, so versus 13.4% statewide. And here being the county, because these are measured at the county level. And the one thing that was shocking to us is the largest percentage is at the 18 through 24-year-old level. And so we've been just, you know, this came on sort of as we were getting ready last week. So we've been digging into this more. Yeah, I mean, so I guess it's in the next slide, maybe, or maybe it's some, yeah. So I think as you look at, yeah, this sort of is the breakdown of looking at all folks that are registered in poverty. One of the things that we found is that, so of that 8,300 in poverty in the 18 through 24-year-old cohort, about 4,000-ish of them are probably enrolled in school, right? But they're living off campus. So technically they should show up in the data if they're living in a dorm. Because they're supposed to be counted back at wherever their home is in the country or place. So these
do you think that happens? Do you think they really get counted back at home?
Yeah, it's a household survey. So yeah, I mean, it is a question of that data, right?
Yeah.
That sometimes, you know, if a student gets, usually they're not filling them out in their dorm. It is probably whoever the household member is at back home is filling it out. These are people, like this survey is done, and these are people that are probably renting an apartment. They could be renting that with multiple people here in the community. And they're supposed to report all income that they have. That doesn't include like if they got a scholarship, but it's money that they got. So if they get a work study or things like that, they're reporting those as earnings basically on that survey. It's the best we have. You know, it's not perfect. Certainly it's a sample that's done. But it underscores for us that there's something going on in this community that we're concerned with, because if you take out those 4,000, that means there's probably like around 2,000 to 3,000 people They're in the community 18 through 24 that are making less than $15,000 a year. Right, and so we even spoke earlier about like things like dropout rates. So they started college and then they dropped out. That's probably, those are some of those people. There are also people that maybe graduated high school and never went on, got a job in retail, got a job in landscaping, got a job someplace else. They're making, below 15,000. So on one side, that's an opportunity. You have a number of people in this community that could be trained up, be your future labor force as you think about growth opportunities, because they're not living a great life right now, right? And they're not able to invest back in this community at what we're seeing in terms of the household income that they have. But we're gonna need to dig into that some more. And so like folks have suggested the interfaith group, which we haven't spoken with yet, we definitely need to sit down with them because they're interacting with these folks. We're starting to think a little bit like, where do they live? And obviously you see concentration around the university there, but you see it throughout the community. So somebody said last night, hey, we're at least, poverty is equally distributed throughout our community. Great, not so great. Yeah, it's not the kind of thing you want to share that kind of non-wealth, throughout the community. So anyway, we're gonna dig into that some more.
Is there a way to benchmark that against like other four-year universities to say, you know what, this is an artifact of having a four-year university that you are going to have that trend? Or is this something that is identified specific to Laramie?
My gut is it's more severe here right now, but that's where looking at those other cities that the university is such a concentration. I mean, we've worked with a lot of communities where the university is a very dominant player. I've never seen numbers that severe in terms of the level of poverty. So I feel like there's something else going on here. And again, I could come back in a month and be like, oh, I was wrong. The data's all crazy. And like, we figured out what the cause is. But, again, as we do these initial scans, it's enough that like, again, issue and maybe an opportunity that's before us that like we haven't really thought about yet. So we're gonna get into that.
So just some key takeaways and happy to pause here too for some thoughts and questions. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about racial and ethnic diversity, gender diversity, but we're also talking about industry diversity because it relates to wages and it relates to poverty levels and employment levels and that sort of thing. So challenges, looking for growth, there's growth in lower wage sectors, but really focusing on diversifying the economy and also working on that town-gown relationship so that people aren't kind of falling through the cracks and have what they need from a skills development perspective to take part in this economy. Opportunities, so again, education as a driver of demographic diversity. Universities are places that draw young, diverse, talented people in with innovative ideas from all different places and all different walks of life. So that's definitely an asset if we can figure out how to capitalize on that. Strong arts and culture sector. So in our noteworthy strategies, we read about the Public Art Advisory Committee, and one of the things it links to economic development. It's bringing in diverse forms of arts and culture, making sure that the artists that are participating are from diverse perspectives, but also looking at the downtown development that's happening with the Laramie Main Street Alliance, making arts and this a destination for arts and culture. These are the types of things that brings young people, young diverse people in and gets them really excited about the community.
As we get to action items, will you help us? Like, I think we'd all like to have more diversity, but what are the key things that we can be doing? Like an action item.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know enough now yet. I mean, we're learning about the community in terms of, I think I said cultural fit a few times. That's certainly a factor. I mean, even our hometown, so we're from Pittsburgh, by the way. I don't think we said that, but even in our hometown, we had, all of a sudden we've got this springing up of the Hispanic culture. And partly it took people to like actually curate to make a neighborhood that was welcoming to them. Right? Because it was very difficult before for them to connect into the community. We see that a lot of university towns that recruit certain like Asian students, other students, if they don't know even where to live, like it's very difficult for them to figure out like, why do I want to stay here? It's like, I just don't see me in this community. And so there's some things there that we'll kind of work with you to talk about.
So best practices.
Yeah.
And Brad, if I can piggyback on that for the group certification. When we wrote the request for proposal, it was really key to city council and to city staff that this isn't just a plan, but this is I call it, instead of just an action plan, it's a doing plan. So our goal is that these guys are going to help us and really put before us late this year a direction and actionable steps that the city, that LCBA, that the university, that all of us can take up and decide to move forward with. So that's the key takeaway. I just don't want to know the issues. We want to know how to fix them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably a good point to mention too. I mean, as because I mentioned up front, our process, I mean, we do dictate in the plan, we're not going to blindside any organization, but we say like, hey, Brad, we want you to be the leader in this initiative, and this is sort of how the rest of this team is going to help support you. And likewise, I mean, the city, here's the role that the city needs to play. So even though it's a city effort, like they don't work if it's just siloed and everybody's like, well, the city's going to fix our economic development. Like that's not the approach, right? And so we're going to be calling on a lot of you to have, and these conversations can be difficult, especially as we get to the end, because it takes us all thinking about the resources that are needed, both people resources and financial resources. You know, are you giving up something to do something else? You know, I mean, we'll have some discussions as we get into this that you're going to push back, we're going to push on you, and so we'll figure that all out together. Nicole's community, let's move along.
That's an important point though. So the last section is around resiliency. This is something that we're coming up more and more in communities where we work, especially in places like the Northeast that are, coastal cities, thinking about how the impacts of storms, for example, storm surges influence their businesses and their businesses' ability to thrive.
But even places like Indianapolis, who,
sure.
I mean, like the drought, Indianapolis wants to have another 1 million people live in it, but they don't have.
Right.
So they don't want to tell anybody that.
So this information is all pulled from the Albany County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So 3 of the key issues that were brought up in that plan, drought, so agricultural impacts, structural impacts. Droughts have been occurring annually since 2000 of varied length and severity. Floods, damage to roads, damage to homes, damage to businesses, an annual estimated loss of potentially $1 million. And then winter storms, we're all familiar with that. Here, road closures and property damage. Again, 80 plus winter storms by their count annually. Possible annual losses are pretty significant there. This is some other areas for consideration as we were looking at other communities and things that we think might be applicable here. So severe weather events and making sure that businesses are prepared for any damages that they incur. Looking at your aquifer, we've heard about the reductions in the levels in the aquifer. How is that going to affect people that want to move here and live here and businesses as well? And then finally, the flood potential. Thinking about the parcels at risk for a 100-year flood, for a 500-year flood, what the estimated economic risk might be, should those things happen to occur. And then just some outside perspective. This group out of Rhode Island looked at businesses and extreme weather. So 40% of small businesses affected by a disaster never reopen. Another 25% of that do reopen fail. The Hartford small business law kind of compiled these reasons for that. So lack of insurance and preparedness, being closed for so long and what that does to their income. Also, consumer perception. If a business is closed for a period of time, there's a likelihood that they just will write that off and won't come back. And then finally, a kind of sector-specific example related to the local region here, thinking about snowpack and glaciers. So since the 1950s, the snowpack in Wyoming has been decreasing. What is that going to do to winter tourism? So we can't predict what's going to happen, but I think these are some key areas to think about. The economic impact of some of these issues is extreme in some cases. Planning for these and thinking about these throughout this process is very important.
Yeah, and I unfortunately earned the nickname Chicken Little in many places. I'm always going, the sky's falling. But I think these are important. I think as we're trying to do a very proactive plan and think about growth and wealth creation, I think we also can't ignore that there may be things we need to do to prepare and be reactive when bad stuff does happen. And so in our planning process, we think about both. And so so that's something we just wanted to share. And I think even the adaptation of jobs is one that we haven't done that work yet, but we view that as a resiliency factor because we know that the future of jobs is going to change, and so we need to make sure that we understand, eyes wide open, like how many jobs are at risk in our community that we need to be thinking about over the next 5-10 years to help.
So some key takeaways: challenges, extreme weather affecting businesses and tourism, infrastructure, keeping up with a region that is growing. There are huge opportunities though when we look around, building an economy that's in some ways built around outdoor recreational pursuits and tourism. Two of the strategies that we've seen, I mentioned the hazard mitigation plan, but the involvement in the brownfield assessment to identify parcels that can be used for redevelopment from a kind of sustainable standpoint. But we're also curious about, are there others in the community that are thinking critically about these issues that we're bringing up here?
Has there been any thought, all of the resiliency factors that you mentioned up there were climate or physical issues as opposed to economic resiliency or business resiliency? I know that's a focus of ours as a company. And I've always thought, I've observed that, Albany County and Laramie, even though it may be a more not as wealthy an area as some other parts of the state, its economy is very resilient, and you don't see the ups and downs that you do in some of the other counties, or even along the Front Range southwest. The economy is pretty darn stable. And in planning and moving forward, making sure that the areas that we do want to grow into are relatively resilient.
Yeah, and that's something, as part of the analysis, that's a piece that we need to take a look at. And it would be curious if anybody has been looking at from an economic, there are certain things, right, that probably your business doing and other business can do. Is there a resource even for other businesses to think about those things, right? Because I think a lot of times you find in the list that Nicole had shared there from the Hartford, those are things that most of those things a company could have prepared for, right? Having the right insurance, understanding where your physical plan, there's things that you can do. And so like making sure that people are aware of those things. Because as we've seen, I was just in the community last week, they're like, we've had our fourth 100-year flood, in 2019 already. So like things are changing like fast in some of these communities. And so like, making sure that then they know on the economic side, if we hit another recession, what's that impact going to have on the business community here? So that's something we'll take a look at in terms of the reliance side of it.
Okay, so that ends our summary. Some of the key takeaways in general that we think are our takeaways, our insights: high poverty, low income levels, concentrations of employment in lower paying industries, high housing costs, limited infrastructure, flat tax revenue, resilience concerns, but also opportunities to build on, educational assets, attracting and retaining businesses in higher paying industries and diversifying the economy, encouraging homegrown business development through tech innovation and small business entrepreneurship, building on the success of downtown and developing amenities, promoting recreational arts and cultural assets to attract talent and businesses, and then supporting infrastructure development. But this is the point where we want to get that gut check from you all. Do these seem like the appropriate things to be focusing on? What did we miss? What's most important here, Dan?
Let me say this. We, as a state, have been probably the most progressive in the country on attracting blockchain technology. We've made our corporate laws very receptive to that. We worked with the university closely at the state level. Our university is really on top of doing blockchain. I think that's a huge opportunity for this community. We've recently had several billionaires come to our state. Heather, you're probably aware of that. Coming to our state because of our progressive corporate laws with blockchain. So I just pass that out, but I think that's very important for us.
Big data.
Big data.
We have already started some initiatives to deal with data. The world is turning on data at an incredible pace. And to manage that data, analyze that data, and use that data appropriately to drive business can be a critical component.
Tim, are you referring to NCAR or other
Nope,
specifics?
other
Okay.
specific data analysis opportunities. We have a couple of things going on. We have an MOU with the University Engineering College to prepare and develop a cyber range. 2 of them here in Laramie.
Who's we?
Brad, myself, and
A corporation.
another, yeah, involved with Laramie Reboot. Also, we've been working on the airport to become the 2nd drone facility in the United States, a drone port, which will drop in large amounts of data. And that project just got a real boost last week. We found out that the company we were working with, we had signed an agreement to work with them to do the development at the airport, purchased 2 aircraft that can now be used by either manned piloting or UAS. And UAS is going to become a big part of our economy. We have an opportunity to be in the middle of the first stage of that happening. We are already online. I'll share with you a document about that. We will start looking at landing aircraft at the Laramie Airport and taking and downloading the data that's being produced with this aircraft. This is the aircraft that they purchased. They're $10 million each. One of them will be in North Dakota, and we're hoping to have the other one here in Laramie. We will become a part of a large network of drone data analysis and handling that data. This is what it looks like, and they have 2 of them. So we've already started that process. I think data and analyzing data brings quality of jobs. Now you talk about, you say unmanned vehicles or non-piloted vehicles. That works for cars, there's research and development being done in that arena at the university as well. But the reality is it's totally different than unmanned. For our flight of this particular aircraft, there's 30 jobs needed to handle it. And so we feel that that's a great avenue for our community, and the jobs are good paying jobs. They're $70,000 to $130,000 annually.
Okay, thanks. Has the law been lifted for beyond visual line of sight?
Doesn't have to with this.
Doesn't have to.
They can start gathering the data today because they have the manned capability. And then when that unmanned capability goes farther and the rules do become compliant, they can shift it to an unmanned version.
They change the rules, they can start, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We have other initiatives that are already underway in town to have one of the biggest ranges for beyond line of sight. It's about getting the entitlements to be able to do the different parts of it. So we're in front of, once they lift line of sight, if we weren't in front of the industry, right, then you're just playing catch up with everybody. So we've been, the airport and LCDA and some other partners have been very engaged in being way out in front. So we have those spaces and those entitlements in place and are already kind of the leaders. So
Building that. Sorry, go ahead.
A lot of the front work has been done with the University of North Dakota.
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, just if it helps sort of stimulate conversation too, I mean, that kind of really touches on, I think a lot of you were thinking about just economic diversity. So I kind of cluster these a little bit. So really thinking about tech friendly, certainly you guys mentioned the UAS activity. So really, and that's in 5 years. We have a lot of work to do, guys, right? I mean, so we want to be economically diverse in 5 years is what the goal is. So we're going to work hard on that. I think the other thing is sort of looking at retail selections. I think thinking about that, sort of the amenities that are here. A number of people talk about that. I think talking about somebody said here will be the cultural capital of Wyoming, right? I think that, sort of like having a one of a kind in Wyoming downtown community culture. So people talk about sort of that place and amenity side of it. Certainly housing was something, and I almost feel like these are tools. So like having the housing, have codes in place that fit sort of what that future should look like. So having the the infrastructure there to make those things happen, I think we're good. Another tool is like having daily flights to Denver, having free flights to Denver. So some both tactical things here and some sort of visionary on that side. And here, I think there were a lot of sort of aspirational things in terms of like, just in 20 years having ample job opportunities for all residents, both with and without college degrees. Again, still economic diversity, being a destination city for university and business opportunities coming together. High-tech companies. So I mean, there's a good amount of overlap in, I think, in terms of a little more like fuzzy or more like aspirational. These are more tactical, but it's usually what we end up seeing with this. But I think it certainly reinforces. The only one, and I don't want to put something on the spot, but I don't know about the pilot destination for Pilot Hill. That seems very specific.
It is.
It is.
Okay, I haven't heard that one yet.
Go ahead.
The county is in the process of acquiring the land east of town to about 5,500 acres
This is the hiking.
for recreation.
Biking. Oh, got it. I haven't guessed I didn't put that name together.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited about that, by the way. I've heard a good bit about
maybe
it.
not the naming.
Yeah,
So,
got it.
yeah.
Got it.
So we only have a few minutes left because I know we all have to go to another meeting right after this.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to end by, so our next steps, our next engagement on the ground here in Laramie will be back in September. And the purpose of that visit is to hold those community engagement sessions, those build sessions that Rich talked about. And those are all based on working groups. So we'll have several breakout groups on a number of topics that we as a group identify as those key challenge areas and opportunities to pursue through the development of this plan. So again, we're 3 weeks in and we've gained perspective just in the last 24 hours being here. But as of yesterday, if we had to choose 5 topic areas, this is where we would land. So we would like your feedback on these and if these are the right ones. And if they are the right ones, either today or through correspondence over email, helping us think about who outside of this room and outside of this group can help contribute to conversations around these topic areas.
Yeah, just so you get a little more flavor. So like, let's say number 2 there, expanding tech innovation entrepreneurship sector, right? So like what ends up happening is we would host a table setting event basically where we'd invite 20 to 30 people. So that would be the thing. We need those names, right? Who are the stakeholders in the community? Both ones that are part of the usual suspects of meeting around these things, but anybody else exciting in the community, somebody up and coming, somebody that's new to the community, want to see sort of how they react to this conversation. So we'll be looking and we'll send a way for you guys to give us that information. But then that would further break down. So at that meeting or that build session, we would end up having probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 tables even that gets down into beyond tech and innovation. So like, what else do we need to do on blockchain? Maybe don't hold me to these things, but like, let's have 4 or 5 people just like rapid iteration, sort of like what's missing from the blockchain conversation, or what's missing. We've been talking to some folks about, do we recruit entrepreneurs that may have moved away? Is there something we can do to offer a little carrot to lure them back to start up their entrepreneurial endeavor here in the community as an attraction? So it would be like having those subtopics and like having people help us basically create it's kind of a lean prototype model of creating an idea, kind of testing it out and giving us enough information then that we start advancing that in the process to build that into sort of a very tangible recommendation. So that would give you a flavor in terms of, so when we're saying like, why do you want so many names? It's because we really do want, what we found in this process, and we've done this a lot, is that we're building sort of this community that's all very excited about this plan because they see the part that they help build or they're part of that conversation. And so it's obviously especially you that are leaders of organizations that we're going to call on, but this creates that constituency of people that understand sort of how we got to this point and have had an imprint. They've left their mark sort of on sort of the development of the plan. It worked, so far it's worked really well to get a lot of community buy-in and allow you to run fast with a group of stakeholders that want to be with you, that want to make these things successful. So that's our philosophy, I guess, behind how we do this, or a theory behind we do this, and sort of what we'll be asking of you in the future.
So here you're wanting us to affirm this top 5 and commit to sending you names,
I think,
subject matter experts?
Yeah, we're going to send you out a follow-up. I think mean, again, this was like before we were prepping. I think we'll start adding some notes, maybe some descriptions under here, exactly what we're talking about. We'll send you that out, as well as sort of a name capturing tool, probably a Google spreadsheet, to start capturing names and contact information of people. So that's, again, as Nicole started, that's one of the really roles we're hoping you guys can help us with, and help, certainly Janine and Sarah with, in terms of like getting the right people around those tables. And so we'll make it easy for you to plop in information and react to these things going forward. But as you drive away or go to another meeting or daydreaming, think about all that.
And in the last few minutes, we do have, if anybody has any questions or comments.
I'd like number 4 to be expanded to not just the downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Those cultural assets exist all over town.
Right.
And the university has many of them to participate in that makes our community different than any other community in the state. And it's a marketing tool.
It is.
I would agree with Tim on this. We should high five each other. I do think there's room and an appetite in Laramie for more social centers. Certainly our downtown is where we all cluster, and it's where the heart of our community is. That is room and an appetite for more gathering places.
Okay. I can't thank you all enough for taking the time and making the commitment to serve on this committee. So thank you so much. We'll try to find a more accommodating space for the next meeting. I appreciate the closeness, however, and we look forward to your ideas and input and to building a pretty cool momentum in the community toward these efforts. I'll just close in saying it's been really interesting to me to hear from Nicole and Rich as they talk to people that our community members are telling them that we have this tremendous energy and volunteerism and activism, because we all know it's true. And I really hope that this panel at the end of the day will sort of corral those energies into the most productive, future actionable things, not only for the people in this room, but more broadly across the community. So super excited. Thank you for your brain power and your time.
Thank you.